She smoothed the $6 bill against the kitchen counter, added it to the envelope with the others, and wrote today's date on the outside in careful handwriting. He thought he was being generous. She was building a case that would end him. The envelope sat between the breakfast plate he hadn't touched and the divorce papers he'd already signed, papers that wouldn't be filed for another 90 days because her lawyer told her to wait, and she'd learned a long time ago that patience was the only weapon people like him never saw coming. $6. Every morning. For 63 days. He handed it to her with the same expression he used when tipping valets, detached kindness, the performance of decency without the cost of actual care. That should cover your groceries today, he'd said this morning, barely looking up from his phone where his mistress's name glowed at the top of the screen. She'd smiled. Thanked him. And slipped the bill into the envelope that would eventually prove what kind of man leaves his 7 months pregnant wife with grocery money while planning a destination wedding in Napa Valley. This is a Tales of the Fireplace story. For anyone who's ever been treated as less than they are, who's been underestimated, dismissed, or discarded by someone who should have known better. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe. These stories matter, and your support helps us keep telling them. And here's a question for you. Have you ever stayed quiet while someone underestimated you, not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the right moment to prove them wrong? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman folding $6 bills into evidence had spent the last 8 years building something so vast, so quietly powerful, that his entire world existed inside it without him ever noticing. And in 72 hours, at the charity gala where he planned to introduce his mistress as his fiancée, she was going to show him exactly what he'd thrown away. Not with anger. Not with tears. With something far more devastating. The truth. The apartment he'd rented for her was in a neighborhood he called transitional. She called it honest. Laurelwood, Pennsylvania, a small town 40 minutes outside Philadelphia where people still knew their neighbors' names and the grocery store closed at 8. It wasn't Manhattan, where they lived together in the penthouse with the view of Central Park. It wasn't even Brooklyn, where she'd grown up sharing a bedroom with 2 sisters and learning that survival meant staying quiet until you were strong enough to speak. It was exactly the kind of place a man like Garrett Ashford would choose for the wife he was discarding. Close enough to claim he was being reasonable. Far enough that he'd never have to see her. She stood at the window of the second-floor walk-up, one hand resting on her stomach where the baby kicked in rhythms that felt like Morse code, messages from a future he'd never be part of unless she decided otherwise. Outside, a woman was unloading groceries from a sedan that had seen better years. 2 kids spilled out behind her, laughing about something only they understood. Normal life. The kind Garrett had never lived and couldn't imagine wanting. Her phone buzzed. A text from him, won't be by tonight. Meeting ran late. Left cash on the counter this morning. She looked at the counter. The $6 was still there, weighted down by her water glass. She didn't respond. She never did anymore. Instead, she opened the folder on her laptop labeled Project Reconstruction, a name her attorney, Miranda Cole, had suggested with the kind of smile that meant she knew exactly how this would end. The files inside told a story Garrett didn't know existed. Acquisition documents. Corporate filings. Shell company structures so elegant they'd been featured in a Harvard Business Review case study under a pseudonym. And at the center of it all, Ashford Venture Group. His company. His legacy. His name. Owned, as of 41 days ago, by a holding company called Ember and Stone Capital, which was itself a subsidiary of CS Global Enterprises, which was registered to a trust controlled by a woman Garrett Ashford had stopped looking at 6 months ago when someone younger, sharper, and more ambitious had walked into his office wearing confidence like a weapon. He thought he'd married someone simple. Someone grateful. Someone who'd be devastated when he left. He'd married a woman who'd made her first $10 million by age 24, her first $100 million by 28, and had been quietly buying pieces of his world ever since, not because she needed to, but because she'd learned early that documentation was destiny and power revealed itself only when the moment was perfect. The baby kicked again. She smiled and whispered, "Not yet, sweetheart. 72 more hours. Then we showed Daddy what patience looks like." Across town, in the glass tower that bore his family name, Garrett Ashford sat in his corner office reviewing seating charts for the Laurelwood Foundation Gala, the event his family had hosted for 30 years, the night when Philadelphia's wealthiest gathered to congratulate themselves on their charity while drinking wine that cost more than most people's rent. This year's gala mattered more than most. This year, he was introducing Simone Lavelle. Not as his consultant. Not as his colleague. As his fiancée. The Riverside Ballroom confirmed the updated guest list. His assistant, Jordan, said from the doorway. "Your mother wants to know if you finalized the seating for Mrs. Ashford." Garrett didn't look up. "She's not coming. She's still legally your wife, Mr. Ashford. The foundation bylaws. Put her name on a table in the back if it makes the paperwork easier. She won't show up. She hasn't left that apartment in weeks." Jordan hesitated. "Sir, the acquisition team also sent over the final reports on the Ember and Stone buyout. They're requesting a meeting to discuss transition strategy." "Not now. We'll handle it after the gala." Garrett signed the seating chart without reading it. "Anything else?" "Your mother called. 3 times. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Tell her I'll see her at the gala." Jordan left. Garrett opened his phone and scrolled to Simone's name. Her last text glowed on the screen, "Picked up my dress. You're going to forget how to breathe when you see me in it." He smiled. Simone understood him in ways his wife never had. She was sharp, ambitious, unafraid to say what she wanted. She didn't cry when he worked late. Didn't ask him to slow down or spend more time at home. Didn't look at him with those exhausted, disappointed eyes that made him feel like he was failing at something he'd never agreed to in the first place. She was easy. His wife had been complicated. And Garrett Ashford had never been good with complicated. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that, complicated, had been protecting him for 8 years from enemies he didn't know he'd made, from business decisions that would have destroyed him, from a mother whose cruelty had nearly cost him everything until the woman he was discarding had quietly, invisibly, restructured his entire world to keep it standing. And now that protection was being withdrawn. 72 hours from now, Garrett Ashford would understand exactly what he'd lost. But by then, it would be far too late to get it back. In Laurelwood, she closed her laptop and picked up the $6 bill. She didn't add it to the envelope yet. Instead, she held it up to the light, studying the face of Hamilton, a man who'd understood that legacy wasn't about blood, but about what you built when no one was watching. 72 hours, she whispered to the empty apartment. And then she smiled. Now let's talk about the woman who taught Garrett Ashford what cruelty looks like when it's dressed up as family values. His mother. Her name was Clara Rain. Not Clara Ashford, despite 8 years of marriage and a baby due in 7 weeks. She'd kept her name because her father told her once, 3 days before he died of a heart attack in the bakery he'd run for 30 years, "A name is the only thing nobody can take from you unless you hand it over. So don't." She hadn't. Garrett had called it charming when they were dating, this stubborn independence from the girl who grew up in South Brooklyn above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and survival. He'd called it difficult by year 3. By year 7, he'd stopped calling it anything at all. Now, at 32, 7 months pregnant, and living in a town where the closest coffee shop closed at noon on Sundays, Clara Rain sat at a kitchen table that wobbled and did what she'd been doing since she was 19 years old. She built empires in silence. The laptop in front of her showed 17 different browser tabs, Bloomberg Terminal, SEC filings, encrypted chat with her acquisition team, and a spreadsheet labeled AR Monthly that tracked every venture, every holding, every silent move she'd made since the day she'd realized that being underestimated was the greatest competitive advantage a woman could have. She'd started small. A $15,000 investment in a logistics startup everyone said would fail. It sold for 40 million 18 months later. She reinvested. Again. And again. By 24, she had 10 million. By 28, 100 million. By 30, she'd stopped counting because the number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the structure, the strategy, the understanding that wealth wasn't about what you spent, but about what you controlled. And now, at 32, she controlled more than Garrett Ashford could comprehend. But you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She wore the same maternity jeans she'd bought at Target 3 months ago. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that hadn't seen a salon since she'd left Manhattan. Her hands, the same hands that had signed acquisition documents worth hundreds of millions, were unmanicured, bare except for the wedding ring she still wore because taking it off felt like admitting defeat, and Clara Rain had never been good at losing. The baby kicked. She placed her palm flat against her stomach and whispered, "I know. I'm tired too." But she didn't stop working. Because 72 hours from now, she had to be ready. Not just legally. Emotionally. She had to be ready to walk into a room full of people who'd watched Garrett discard her, who'd whispered about the pregnant wife he'd outgrown, who'd smiled at Simone Lavelle and pretended not to notice the cruelty. And she had to do it without rage. Without tears. With nothing but the quiet, devastating truth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miranda Cole, her attorney. Gala seating chart just leaked. He put you at table 19. Back corner. Near the kitchen. Clara stared at the message. Table 19. The table reserved for minor donors, plus ones nobody knew, and people included out of obligation rather than respect. She typed back, "Perfect." Miranda responded immediately, "Perfect?" "Clara, that's an insult." Clara smiled and replied, "Exactly. Let him insult me one more time in public. I want witnesses." She set the phone down and returned to her laptop, pulling up the file labeled, Gala, Final Execution. Inside were documents Miranda had prepared with the precision of a surgeon. Ownership transfer records. Corporate bylaws. A speech, 3 minutes long, that would rewrite everything Garrett Ashford believed about power, legacy, and the woman he'd handed $6 this morning like it was generosity. Clara read it once. Twice. Then she closed the file and stood, moving to the window where the evening light turned the neighborhood gold. Outside, the woman with the groceries was back, this time sitting on her porch with a cup of something warm, watching her kids chase each other in circles. Clara wondered what that felt like. To be unburdened. To live a life where the worst thing that happened was running out of milk or forgetting to pay the electric bill. She placed her hand on her stomach again and whispered, "You're going to have a different life, baby. I promise." But first, she had to finish the one she was living. Him. Garrett Ashford didn't think of himself as cruel. He thought of himself as practical. At 38, he'd inherited Ashford Venture Group from his father, who'd inherited it from his father, who'd built it from nothing in the 1960s with a loan, a dream, and the kind of ruthless determination that people called visionary when it worked and reckless when it didn't. Garrett had been raised to believe that legacy was the only thing that mattered. Not happiness. Not love. Legacy. And legacy required sacrifice. He'd sacrificed his 20s to business school and 80-hour weeks. He'd sacrificed his 30s to building the firm into something his grandfather would respect. And now, at 38, he was sacrificing a marriage that had stopped making sense the moment he'd realized his wife didn't want the same things he did. Clara wanted small. Quiet. She wanted dinner at home and weekends without emails and conversations that weren't about market trends or acquisition strategies. She wanted him to care about things that didn't scale. And Garrett Ashford had never understood the point of anything that didn't scale. Simone was different. Simone understood that relationships were partnerships, that love was about alignment, that two ambitious people could build something greater together than they ever could apart. When he'd met her 6 months ago, hired her to consult on a restructuring project, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. She challenged him. Pushed him. Made him feel like the best version of himself instead of the disappointing version Clara's silences suggested he'd become. So he'd made a choice. A practical one. He'd asked Clara for a divorce, set her up in an apartment, and made sure she had enough to get by until the baby was born and they could formalize custody arrangements that would be fair, reasonable, and allow him to move forward without guilt. $6 a day. Enough for groceries, gas, whatever she needed. He thought he was being generous. He had no idea he was being documented. Now, sitting in his office with the city sprawling below him, Garrett reviewed emails from his executive team, approved budgets he barely read, and ignored the feeling in his chest that felt uncomfortably like doubt. His mother had called again. He hadn't answered. Victoria Ashford, 64 years old, silver-haired, sharp-tongued, and legendary in Philadelphia social circles for her ability to dismantle someone's reputation with a single well-placed comment at a charity luncheon, had opinions about everything, but especially about Clara. She'd never approved of the marriage. "She's not one of us," Victoria had said the night Garrett introduced them. "She's sweet, I'm sure, but sweetness doesn't build dynasties, darling." Garrett had ignored her then. Married Clara anyway. Believed love could be enough. But 8 years later, his mother's words echoed louder than he wanted to admit, and when Simone Lavelle walked into his life with her tailored suits and her MBA from Wharton and her understanding that power was something you took, not something you apologized for, he'd finally understood what his mother meant. Clara didn't belong in his world. She never had. And keeping her there had been the kindness that was actually cruelty, because it gave her hope for something that was never going to work. At least, that's what he told himself. What he didn't tell himself, what he refused to examine, was that Clara had never asked to be part of his world. She'd built her own. And he'd been too busy looking at himself to notice. His phone buzzed. A text from Simone, "Your mother just called me. She wants to have lunch tomorrow to get to know me better. Should I be nervous?" Garrett smiled and typed back, "She's going to love you." Simone replied with a heart emoji. He stared at it, feeling something that should have been happiness but landed closer to relief. Relief that someone finally made sense. Relief that he didn't have to keep pretending he was someone he wasn't. Relief that in 72 hours, at the gala, he could finally introduce Simone as his future and stop living in the awkward in-between of a marriage that had ended long before he'd filed the papers. What Garrett didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that Clara Rain had spent 8 years protecting him from his own blind spots, cleaning up his mistakes, and quietly saving a company that had been bleeding money since the year he took over. And now that protection was ending. In 72 hours, Garrett Ashford would stand in front of everyone who mattered and realize that the woman he'd discarded had been holding his entire world together. And without her, it was about to collapse. Back in Laurelwood, Clara closed her laptop and stood, stretching her back against the ache that came with carrying another human being. She walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. Inside, hanging alone, was a dress. Midnight blue. Custom made. Elegant in a way that didn't apologize. She ran her fingers along the fabric and smiled. 72 hours. And then the world would see what quiet looked like when it finally decided to speak. The call came at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, 60 hours before the gala. Clara was in bed, propped up against pillows she'd arranged to support her back, reading through depositions Miranda had sent over, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, curiosity, the particular timing of calls that come late and unannounced, made her pick up. "Hello." Silence. Then breathing. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 3 months. "Clara, it's Victoria." Clara sat up straighter, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "Mrs. Ashford. I'm calling because someone needs to." Victoria's voice was cold, controlled, the tone of a woman who'd spent decades delivering bad news with impeccable manners. "I'm calling to spare you embarrassment." Clara said nothing. Victoria continued. "I know Garrett put your name on the gala seating chart. Table 19. And I know you're proud, but darling, pride only takes you so far. This event is important to our family. Simone will be there. Garrett will be introducing her formally. And I truly think, it would be better for everyone, especially for you, if you stayed home. Clara's jaw tightened. She waited. You're 7 months pregnant, Victoria said, her voice softening into something that almost sounded like sympathy. You're living in that little apartment in Laurelwood. People are going to look at you and feel pity, Clara. And I don't want that for you. I don't want you to spend an evening being whispered about while my son moves on with someone who... Someone who what? Clara's voice was quiet, but it cut. Victoria paused. Someone who fits, darling. Someone who understands what it means to be part of this world. You were always sweet, but you were never built for this. And that's not a criticism. It's just the truth. Clara closed her eyes. Breathed. Counted to 5. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. I appreciate the call, Mrs. Ashford. But I'll be attending. Clara. I'm still legally Garrett's wife. My name is on the guest list. And I have every right to be there. Legally, yes. But socially. I'll see you Saturday night. Clara hung up. Her hand was shaking. Not from fear. From rage so pure and white-hot that it took her a full minute to remember how to breathe. She set the phone down, stared at the ceiling, and let the truth settle over her like cold water. Victoria Ashford had just made a mistake. A fatal one. Because up until this moment, Clara had been planning to reveal the truth quietly, through her lawyers, through paperwork, through the kind of corporate maneuvering that happened in boardrooms, not ballrooms. But now she wanted witnesses. She picked up her phone and texted Miranda, change of plans. I want to make the announcement myself. At the gala. Publicly. Miranda's response came in seconds, Clara. Are you sure? That's nuclear. Clara typed back, his mother just called to uninvite me from my own company's event. Yes. I'm sure. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, I'll prepare remarks. You'll need to be ready for fallout. Clara, I've been ready for 8 years. She set the phone down and stood, walking to the window. Outside, Laurelwood was dark except for streetlights and the glow of televisions in living rooms where people lived normal lives, lives without corporate warfare, without betrayal dressed up as practicality, without mothers-in-law who called late at night to suggest you weren't good enough for the family you'd spent 8 years supporting. Clara placed both hands on her stomach and whispered, your grandmother just made sure you'll inherit a better legacy than the one she tried to build. The baby kicked. Clara smiled. 60 hours before. The next morning, Garrett sat across from his mother at Le Jardin, the French restaurant where Victoria held all her important meetings, the ones that required white tablecloths, discretion, and waitstaff who knew not to interrupt. You look tired, Victoria said, studying him over the rim of her coffee cup. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're getting divorced, you're about to go public with a new relationship, and you're trying to hold together a company that's been struggling for 2 years. That's not fine, darling. That's barely functional. Garrett set down his fork. The company is stable. The company is surviving because of the Ember and Stone acquisition. That capital injection bought you time, but it didn't fix the underlying problems. Victoria leaned forward. You need to focus, Garrett. And that means eliminating distractions. Clara's not a distraction. She will be if she shows up Saturday night. Garrett frowned. What are you talking about? Victoria sighed, the particular sigh she used when she was about to say something she believed was for his own good. I called her last night. I suggested, gently, that perhaps attending the gala wasn't in her best interest. Given the circumstances. Garrett's chest tightened. You did what? I was trying to help, Garrett. Can you imagine how humiliating it will be for her? Sitting in the back while you introduce Simone to everyone who matters. I was trying to spare her that. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your mother. And I'm trying to protect you from the mess this will become if she shows up and makes a scene. Clara doesn't make scenes. Everyone makes scenes when they're hurt enough. Victoria's voice softened. She's 7 months pregnant, alone, and about to watch you move on publicly. If you think she's going to sit quietly in the back and smile, you don't know women as well as you think you do. Garrett stared at his mother, feeling something uncomfortable twist in his gut. Clara had never made a scene. Not when he'd asked for the divorce. Not when he'd told her about Simone. Not even when he'd handed her $6 that first morning and watched her fold it into her wallet without comment. She'd been quiet. Too quiet. And for the first time, Garrett wondered if quiet had been strategy instead of acceptance. She won't be a problem, Garrett said, but his voice lacked conviction. Victoria smiled. Good. Then we have nothing to worry about. But the tightness in Garrett's chest didn't ease. It grew. 48 hours before. Clara stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. The dress fit perfectly, tailored to accommodate her pregnancy without hiding it, midnight blue fabric that made her skin glow, neckline that was elegant without trying too hard. She looked like someone who belonged. That was the point. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Miranda, documents are ready. Security team briefed. We're locked in. Clara typed back, see you Saturday. She turned sideways, examining the dress from another angle, and felt the baby shift. Almost time, she whispered. Another text came through. This one from a number she didn't recognize. Is this Clara Rain? She frowned and replied, who is this? The response was immediate, Simone Lavelle. We need to talk. Clara's breath caught. She stared at the screen, reading the name again. Simone Lavelle. The woman who'd been sleeping with her husband for 6 months. The woman who'd be wearing an engagement ring tomorrow night. The woman who had no idea what she'd actually won. Clara's finger hovered over the screen. She could ignore it. Block the number. Pretend she'd never seen it. But curiosity, and something darker, something that wanted to see what Simone thought she knew, made her type back, talk about what? 3 dots appeared. Then, I know what Garrett's been doing. The money. The apartment. The way he's treating you. And I think you deserve to know that I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't know you were pregnant when we started. And I think maybe we're both being played. Clara read the message twice. Then she sat down on the edge of the bathtub, heart pounding, and realized that Simone Lavelle had just made the second biggest mistake of her life. The first was falling for Garrett Ashford. The second was reaching out to the woman who was about to take everything he had. Clara typed carefully, meet me tomorrow. 2 p.m. Laurelwood Coffee House. Simone, I'll be there. Clara set the phone down and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The game had just changed. And she had less than 48 hours to decide whether Simone Lavelle was an enemy. Or an accidental ally. Laurelwood Coffee House wasn't the kind of place people like Simone Lavelle usually visited. It was small, worn in the way old books are worn, loved into softness. The chairs didn't match. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard that hadn't been updated in 3 weeks. And the coffee came in ceramic mugs instead of paper cups with names spelled wrong. Clara arrived first. She sat in the back corner, facing the door, one hand wrapped around a decaf latte she hadn't touched, the other resting on her stomach where the baby had been kicking all morning like it knew something important was about to happen. At 2:03 p.m., the door opened. Simone Lavelle walked in. Clara recognized her immediately, not from photographs, though she'd seen plenty, but from the way she moved. Confident. Polished. The kind of woman who'd never questioned whether she belonged anywhere because she'd spent her entire life being told she did. She wore tailored black pants, a cream blouse, and heels that clicked against the wood floor as she scanned the room. Their eyes met. Simone hesitated. Then walked over. Up close, she was younger than Clara expected, maybe 30, maybe younger. Pretty in a deliberate way. The kind of beauty that required maintenance and discipline and the belief that appearance was strategy. Clara? Simone's voice was softer than Clara imagined. Sit. Simone sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The coffee shop hummed around them, espresso machine hissing, low conversations, the scrape of a chair somewhere behind them. Finally, Simone broke the silence. Thank you for meeting me. Clara said nothing. Simone shifted in her seat. I know this is. I know you have every reason to hate me. I don't hate you. Clara's voice was calm, almost clinical. I don't know you well enough to hate you. Simone blinked, clearly thrown by the response. Clara continued. But I am curious why you're here. What exactly do you think we need to talk about? Simone exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath. I think Garrett lied to both of us. Go on. He told me you two were separated. That the marriage had been over for a year. That you'd both agreed to divorce and were just waiting for the paperwork to finalize. Simone's hands twisted in her lap. He never mentioned you were pregnant until 3 months ago. And when I found out, he said it was complicated. That you'd gotten pregnant right before you separated. That it wasn't planned. Clara's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. And you believed him? I wanted to. Simone looked down. I wanted to believe I wasn't the kind of person who'd sleep with someone's husband. That I wasn't, that. But you are that person. Clara's words landed without malice, just fact. Simone flinched. Yes. Silence. Then Simone looked up, and Clara saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not defiance. Shame. I found out about the $6 2 days ago, Simone said quietly. I was at his apartment. He left his laptop open. There was a spreadsheet, expenses, labeled, Clara, daily allowance. $6 a day. For 2 months. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. I asked him about it. He said it was temporary. That you were being difficult about the divorce settlement, so he was giving you just enough to get by until you agreed to his terms. And when I said that sounded cruel, he told me I didn't understand how divorce works. That sometimes you have to apply pressure. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Simone met her eyes. Because yesterday, his mother called me. She wanted to have lunch. And she spent an hour telling me about legacy. About the kind of woman the Ashford family needs. About how Garrett's father married the wrong woman once, and how she made sure he didn't make that mistake. And then she looked at me and said, You're the right kind of woman, Simone. Don't let him settle for less this time. Simone's hands were shaking now. And I realized, sitting there, listening to her talk about you like you were a mistake he'd corrected, that I'm not with Garrett because he loves me. I'm with him because I'm the kind of woman his mother approves of. And the second I stop being useful, the second I age or gain weight or have an opinion that doesn't align with his ambitions. You'll be me, Clara finished. Simone nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I'll be you. Clara studied the woman across from her. The woman who'd been sleeping with her husband. The woman who was supposed to be her enemy. And saw, for the first time, not a villain, but someone who'd been cast in a play she didn't write and was only now realizing she'd been handed the wrong script. What do you want from me, Simone? Simone wiped her eyes. I don't know. Maybe I just needed to see you. To understand who I've been helping him hurt. Or maybe. She paused. Maybe I needed you to tell me I'm not crazy for thinking something's wrong. Clara leaned back in her chair, her hand moving to her stomach. The baby kicked. She made a decision. Simone, can I ask you something? Yes. Do you know what Garrett does for a living? I mean really does. Day to day. Simone frowned. He runs Ashford Venture Group. He invests in companies. Acquisitions, restructuring, growth strategies. Has he told you how the company's performing? He said it's been challenging. Market conditions. But that the Ember and Stone acquisition gave them the capital they needed to stabilize. Clara almost smiled. Did he tell you who owns Ember and Stone? Simone blinked. Some holding company. I don't remember the name. The holding company is a subsidiary of CS Global Enterprises, which is controlled by a private trust. And that trust is registered to someone Garrett stopped paying attention to about 6 months ago. Simone's face went pale. You? Clara didn't answer directly. Tomorrow night at the gala, Garrett's going to introduce you as his fiancée. His mother is going to give a speech about family legacy. And everyone who matters in Philadelphia is going to congratulate him on moving forward with the right kind of woman. Clara. And I'm going to stand up, Clara continued, her voice quiet but lined with steel, and I'm going to tell them who actually owns the company they're all celebrating. Who actually saved it from bankruptcy 2 years ago. Who actually cleaned up every mistake Garrett made while he was too busy building his ego to notice he was destroying his legacy. Simone stared at her, speechless. Clara leaned forward. So here's what I need to know, Simone. Tomorrow night, when everything Garrett believes about himself gets dismantled in front of everyone he's ever wanted to impress, are you going to stand by him? Or are you going to walk away? Simone's mouth opened. Closed. I don't know. Then you have 24 hours to decide. Clara stood slowly, carefully, her hand braced against the table. Because if you stay with him after tomorrow night, you need to understand what you're signing up for. You're not signing up for wealth or status or the Ashford name. You're signing up for a man who will give you $6 a day and call it generosity when things fall apart. Clara pulled on her coat, moving slowly around her pregnant belly. Simone sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Why are you telling me this? Simone whispered. Clara paused at the door and looked back. Because I used to be you. Young, ambitious, convinced that if I just worked hard enough and loved well enough and sacrificed enough, I'd be valued. And I wasn't. Not by him. Not by his mother. Not by anyone in that world. She placed her hand on her stomach. But I valued myself. And I documented everything. And tomorrow night, everyone else is going to see what I've known for 8 years. What's that? Clara smiled, small, sad, and devastatingly final. That I was never the one who needed them. They were the ones who needed me. She walked out. Behind her, Simone Lavelle sat alone in a coffee shop in Laurelwood, Pennsylvania, staring at the table where the pregnant wife she'd helped betray had just offered her the truth instead of revenge. And for the first time since she'd met Garrett Ashford, Simone wondered if she'd won anything at all. 24 hours before. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table with Miranda on speakerphone, reviewing the final details. Security will be positioned at every entrance, Miranda said. Your remarks are loaded on the teleprompter as a backup, but I know you're planning to speak from memory. I am. The ownership documents will be distributed to every board member the moment you finish speaking. Legal has prepared responses to every possible challenge. And we've notified the press that there will be a significant announcement, they'll be watching. Clara nodded, staring at the dress hanging on the back of her bedroom door. Clara, Miranda's voice softened. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? We can still handle this through channels. Quietly. His mother called to uninvite me from my own company's event, Miranda. There's nothing quiet left. Fair enough. Miranda paused. For what it's worth, I think you're the most terrifying client I've ever had. Clara smiled. Good. They hung up. Clara walked to the window and looked out at Laurelwood, this small town Garrett had chosen because he thought it would contain her, diminish her, make her forgettable. Instead, it had given her clarity. Distance. The space to see exactly who she'd married and exactly what she needed to do. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm not coming tomorrow night. I'm leaving Philadelphia. I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better. S. Clara stared at the message. Simone was gone. Which meant tomorrow night, when Garrett stood up to introduce his fiancée to 400 people. She wouldn't be there. Clara typed back, "Good luck, Simone." Mean it. Then she set the phone down and whispered to her baby, "Looks like it's just us tomorrow, sweetheart." The baby kicked in response. And Clara Rain smiled. The Riverside ballroom glittered with old money and older secrets. 400 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits, champagne flowing, the Ashford name displayed on banners like a dynasty that would last forever. Clara entered through the main doors at 7:32 p.m., wearing midnight blue and her baby-like armor. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. She walked to table 19 in the back corner and sat down, folding her hands over her stomach. At the head table, Garrett stood to make his announcement, scanning the room for Simone. She wasn't there. His mother leaned over, whispering urgently. His face paled. But he recovered, clearing his throat into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for celebrating another year of Ashford legacy with us." Applause. Clara waited. "Tonight, I want to acknowledge the hard work that's gone into stabilizing our company during challenging times. The Ember and Stone acquisition gave us the foundation we needed to." Clara stood. The room went silent. Garrett stopped mid-sentence, staring at her. She walked slowly toward the stage, every eye following her pregnant form as she moved through tables of Philadelphia's elite. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Clara said, her voice quiet but perfectly clear. "But I think there's been some confusion about who deserves credit for that acquisition." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Clara, this isn't. I own Ember and Stone Capital." She reached the stage. "Which means I own 73% of Ashford Venture Group. I've owned it for 6 weeks. Every board member in this room signed documents recommending the sale. To me." The silence was absolute. Victoria Ashford's face drained of color. Clara continued, pulling a folded document from her clutch. "This company was hemorrhaging money. I saved it. Not because Garrett asked me to, he didn't notice it was dying. I saved it because I spent 8 years protecting a man who thought $6 a day was adequate support for his pregnant wife." She placed the document on the podium. "As of Monday morning, the company will be restructured. New leadership. New values. And a new name, Rain Ashford Industries. Because legacy isn't about who inherits wealth. It's about who builds character." She walked off the stage. The room erupted. Garrett caught her in the corridor, his face twisted with confusion and rage. "What the hell did you just do?" "I told the truth." "You humiliated me." "No." Clara's voice was steel. "You humiliated yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. I gave you everything. You gave me $6 a day, Garrett. I gave you 8 years of fixing your mistakes while you texted your mistress under the dinner table." He stared at her, speechless. Behind him, Victoria appeared, her legendary composure shattered. "You've destroyed us." Clara met her eyes. "No. I've freed you. Now you can build something real instead of pretending cruelty is sophistication." She walked away, leaving them both standing in the ruins of their own making. 3 months later, Clara sat in her new office, the penthouse suite that used to be Victoria's, with her daughter sleeping in a bassinet beside her desk. Sophia Elena Rain. Born healthy, perfect, loved. A letter sat on Clara's desk. From Garrett. The 14th he'd sent. I'm sorry. I understand now what I lost. Not the company, you. And I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to become someone our daughter won't be ashamed of. Clara folded it carefully and placed it in a file labeled Evidence of Growth. She didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she kept them. Because documentation worked both ways. If this story reminded you of someone who underestimated you, or someone you underestimated, share it with them. Sometimes the best lessons come from stories that mirror our own. 6 months after the gala, Clara stood at her office window, Sophia on her hip, watching the city her company now helped rebuild. Garrett worked 3 floors below, still CEO, but earning his position daily through actual competence instead of inherited legacy. He'd never be wealthy again. The divorce had been ungenerous. But Clara noticed he smiled more now. Treated people better. Seemed lighter without the weight of pretending to be generous while being cruel. Simone had sent a card when Sophia was born. She'd married someone else, someone who valued her for more than her ability to fit a role. Victoria had disappeared to Florida. Silent at last. And the company thrived under values that were actually practiced instead of performed. Clara whispered to her daughter, "Your grandmother wanted me to teach you about legacy. So here it is, your worth is never determined by how others value you, but by how you value yourself enough to document the truth and wait for the right moment to reveal it." Sophia grabbed Clara's finger and held on. Outside, the city continued. Full of people making choices about character and consequence. And in that office, the woman who'd counted $6 bills had transformed patience into power and humiliation into triumph, not through anger, but through strategic, documented, undeniable proof of who she'd always been. The most powerful person in the room. She just had to wait for everyone else to notice. Thank you for spending this time with Tales of the Fireplace. If this story moved you, like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. And one last question. What moment from Clara's journey stayed with you most? Was it the $6? The coffee shop meeting? The gala reveal? Or something else? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.